Without further ado, I bring to you the one and only, the great Peter Robbins.
Thank you, Mike. You do this work long enough, and you're kind of taken from area to area of study simply by virtue of your own curiosity. In the late 1970s, NASA and JPL began to make available to the public high-resolution photographs taken above the moon, ultimately above Mars, and then once we had rovers on Mars, of the surface. Certain objects, configurations, did not fit into the natural scheme of things. They suggested organized activity, architecture, mining operations, buildings, and almost more improbable, face-to-face on the surface of Mars, objects on the surface that NASA maintains are tricks of light, illusion, our imagination, or examples of what we call pareidolia, which is defined as the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. Everybody knows that photographs can't be trusted anymore. Anything can be duplicated or made to look a certain way through the magic of Photoshop. However, the images that we'll be seeing, especially toward the end, have a certain pedigree that NASA can't wiggle their way out of. They're presented in their original NASA framing, which shows the date, the time, the mission, the longitude and latitude, and so on. They can be checked against the NASA database. Early this year, I had a guest on my radio show, old friend and colleague named Ben Moss. Ben's a solid, pragmatic UFO researcher, and several years back, he and his co-author produced a terrific book called Not of This Earth, an outstanding, very detailed case study of the so-called Lonnie Zamora case, a New Mexico police officer who saw the landing of a specific craft. There were after effects, anomalous changes to organic material in the area, and he had started posting on his Facebook page some of these images, and I became re-intrigued with them. Nothing that I'm presenting here today is original. I'm simply presenting other people's findings, but they're important in that if we can find a way to make them figures in government who are now trying to get disclosure, who are doing their best to get more information released, have never even referred to these images, again, because we're also deeply conditioned to photographs can be manipulated. My reason for doing this talk, and I'll be doing this talk again in a week and a half in England, is because we, the public, and our representatives need to understand that this is yet one more valuable, absolutely gilt-edged tool in our quest for disclosure. We have a lot of material to go through, so with no further ado, this thing, this shape, appears on Mars. We've all seen this before. It's the foundation of a simple rectangular structure. It cannot and did not happen in nature. This photograph is taken on the moon. And once again, although either very ancient or subject to cover of dust or whatever, we're seeing the same damn thing. Surface of Mars, what is that? I'm willing to say maybe there's a chance that it's a random arrangement of rocks. Okay. But that, on the surface of Mars, maybe it's just a random shape that our eyes are suggesting is representative of, well, one of us, human types. NASA says it's a play of light. It's an illusion. This is what I would call an orphan photograph. It doesn't come with provenance. I present it in that spirit. If that's on the surface of Mars, well, I'd say that's pretty definitive. But again, it's in that, what Stanton Friedman used to call his gray box. What is that reflection of? What is that light source? That arrow on the lower left, it sort of looks a bit like a skull. And when we look at close up, it looks even more so. But you know what? I'm willing to accept that could have happened in nature too. But it's intriguing. Again, defining our terms. Let's go to Earth. Forgive me, but I feel the subject also applies to the manufactured world. There is something in the human condition that likes anthropomorphizing these things, seeing them in terms of representational human form. Some of them are great. May it rest in peace. I'm lucky enough to remember on childhood vacation visiting New Hampshire and looking at that wonderful thing and being quite thrilled as a 14-year-old. I don't even know what we're looking at here. This is a photo I took. Now, what the hell was I finding here? Oh, yes, a poodle. There's the snout, there's its big leg, and there's a cloud. But he cut me some slack. Edvard Munch's The Scream. Thank goodness for Google Earth. And allow me one moment of overt humor. I think it's Photoshop, but I hope not. And one more for good measure. Well, and vegetarians think they're such, these are nasty bastards, you can tell. This is my favorite. On we go. This book came out in the 1970s, and George Leonard was a real pioneer in this. He worked from NASA photographs, but it's filled with hundreds of sketches. But he really pointed the way here. Extraterrestrial Archaeology by my colleague David Childress showed like second-generation Xeroxes of some anomalies on the surface of Moon and Mars that intrigued me tremendously. Moon Anomalies, quite a scholarly book, actually. This one even more so. There is a history of scholarly studies around this phenomena. Then we come to Richard Hoagland, who about 1990 was the pioneer in presenting us Cydonia and the face on Mars. This was terribly exciting to a lot of us. If it's authentic, it's something like 5 miles by 2.5 miles by 1.5 miles high. That's a hell of an earthwork. NASA then rained on our parade and said, it's really not this. This was a play of light. It was a momentary catching of shadows and light. What we were really seeing was this. And I was trusting enough to say to myself, that's possible too. But in later years, I found myself saying, hang on, maybe it really was that. And NASA did a little bit of magic and showed us this. Be that as it may, what really is going on the surface of the moon? What is that tracking? Could that have happened in nature? What are those white dots at the center of each of those craters? It's not a natural formation, a crater, and it photographs to some degree like a geodesic dome of appreciable size would on Earth. Again, the photos I'm showing you now have incomplete provenance, but I believe many of them are just what we see and the way it is. Now, it takes a moment here. Are we looking at something concave or is it really convex? And if so, how do these shapes happen in the natural formation and progression of evolution of the surface of the moon? What is that cluster of, once again, these circular shapes? What's that? What are these 3 evenly spaced features? And are they related to the one in the lower left? This one, if fully authentic, is really problematic because we've seen things like this on Earth. It's organized, intentional activity, perhaps. This one, if fully authentic, bust the mold. This one, even more so. Same here, to put it mildly. What are these? How did this straight line happen? Is it possible in the formation of the surface that there was a fragmenting or a crystalline reaction in some way? Or is this the remains of what might photograph from Earth, from the surface, of the remains of an ancient civilization? Is this the remains of foundations, of connected structures within what we might call an enclave, a colony, or whatever? Or, and I'm willing to say, sure, maybe this can happen in nature, but I have problems with it. This, on the moon, my first take on it was, it looks a little like an observatory, but that's, once again, my superimposing my own mental predisposition. My first thought when I saw these was I read them as convex and then immediately saw them as pyramid-shaped. The pyramid, of course, is an ancient structure we see on Earth cross-culturally around the world going back thousands of years. This one's a real problem. This is on the surface of the moon. Close up. Close up. Could this be a degraded hillside that comes off looking like a pyramid? Or is this a structure that's who knows how old, that's been degraded by time, weather, what have you? This is photographed moving above the surface of the moon. NASA gives no explanation, and we're simply stuck with it. Right. As I became re-involved in this, I became aware of a number of websites dedicated to this general subject, and a dialogue, a lively dialogue going on among specialty researchers whose domain is going over high-resolution photographs with 10-power glasses and loops, finding these anomalies, and then talking to each other about what they might represent. I found myself, as I went through their comments, and some of them very extensive, agreeing with some, not agreeing with others, having my own thought, and then reading their description, thinking, that's not out of the question. But there is this phenomena on the moon and on Mars of what we can only interpret as towers. Now, that little star shape is an indication put by NASA just to mark it. But if that tower is a tower, it's 10 or 20 miles high. Once again, we have that shape within a crater and what could be a shadow, a path, an intentional operation of some sort. This one I put in because it's intriguing what happens in nature. And is this representative of intentional activity or just part of the way things happen? I just thought it was really interesting, and it's something to give us a comparison to some of the more pronounced images we're seeing. This is an actual photograph from X number of miles up from the moon of a particularly high tower, miles high. And I'm not even sure what the feature here I was looking for was, but now, one of the things that occurred to me immediately was that in order to, you believe something so much that you feel a white lie in the service of a great truth is forgivable. For me, it's not. When you lie, you're a liar. When you fake something, it doesn't matter what your intention of the goal you're producing, you fake something. There is no question that a number of the images that come to us officially have been altered. But in every single case, the alteration occurred at the NASA or JPL level. And it's almost always defined by an fusing, sometimes overt like this, sometimes more subtle, but still. We're using the highest level Hasselblad camera technology with the best resolution in the world. What is this? And again, this is one of the websites, and you can see they have all the NASA information. Longitude, latitude, when it was taken, etc. Their commentary is massive object, straight linear lines, all compromised by tampering. That's their opinion. And in more and more of these pictures, it's my opinion as well. I mean, come on. Now, let's just think for a moment. You work for NASA, you have different level of security clearances, and if you're involved in realizing and assigned to this particular project of keeping Earth's civilizations from this rather shocking truth, you're cleared to a certain level, and then you have the technology to do what they're doing. But even though it's kind of cool to be involved in a classified project, it might be fairly tedious. And as we go on, one of the most exciting parts for me, and we'll see it in a bit, is that in some cases, the technicians don't quite work to the edge of what they're trying to fuse. What's up? Now, they also, once you get involved with these people's thinking, they are micro-analyzing shapes that for most of us, it's light and shadow. And they put forward more massive, tall structures and tiny ones that, again, when you start to look at Google Earth or photographs taken from above, are identical to certain phenomena on Earth, like domes, like buildings, etc. What's that straight line? Somebody either forgot to cover it or read it as something that could pass and not be brought to the attention of the public or make them aware. Bing. That phenomena, that thing that couldn't happen in nature, even if it was, say, a perfect half crater, you can't dig half a hole on a certain philosophical level. When a foreign body hits the surface of the moon, it creates a circular impression. That straight vertical line is something like 25 miles long. So, to the surface of Mars. One of the observers joked that this was obviously a huge drill bit that had been left there by some ancient civilization. Ha ha ha. Could that happen in nature? I don't know quite enough about the formation of structures, but it strikes me as anomalous and that it shouldn't be there. What is that series of half circles? It looks like kind of a stack of old coins in the dirt. Could it happen in nature? I can't say definitively, but it's problematic for me. Photo taken of Mars rover, the rover Curiosity. And once again, what has the rover, photographed? First thought, an ancient urn or vessel, but it's a simple form. Could it be a play of light? Could it be nature mimicking a form that we're familiar with? I guess it's possible. Again, raw image, courtesy of NASA JPL. Often the specific analyst, and they're self-assigned, they're folks like us who simply get involved, gives you their name or the name that they're using as a researcher on these various sites. This is just a really, I thought, an interesting shot of the surface of Mars in a certain area, but we have this thing larger. It looks like a fragment of, sheet plastic. One can say, well, a lander landed near there, a piece tore away, it was photographed, or it's left over from some Martian painting their home and having the drop cloth rip. I'm joking, of course, but it's problematic. Same here. Is that something, first, the general shape, looks like kind of a piece of old wood or something. Could that be some degrading rock form? Sure, why not? But. Okay, now we come into the land of more problematic images. unless you visualize dumpsters on Mars. That, if this is fully authentic, game over. And I believe it is. This is doubly interesting because we have this photo of this. This is above the surface. This is something moving along above the surface of the planet, referred to as artifacts. Again, this is the surface of Mars, and we captured these things that I think it's safe to say are not ours. They may be, but okay. Once again, these don't belong there. Perhaps there's some scientific explanation, crystalline structure. We now know that the idea of water on Mars is not, we've been told it's kind of in the permafrost kind of thing, and it could be extracted, oxygen, et cetera. But there are open bodies of water on Mars, although they have not been acknowledged by NASA, JPL, or our scientific establishment. Once again, we have this patterning that stands out to us. This. On this hillside. Whoop. And here it is larger. Could that be a natural anomaly? Sure, why not? But once again, this is a good example of something I'm happy to say, yeah, rock face, I've got no problem with that. Again, I'm including some of these images as points of comparison for us. And we should all be looking at these with our most critical eye. The I want to believe mentality, for most of us, for all of us, I think is better stated as not I want to believe, but I want to know. Right. Rock form or anomaly? I'm fine with rock form, but, and here's one that really pushes it for me. Is this some kind of structure, that a natural structure, or with the sharp edges and the seeming dislocation of it compared to some of the, well, most of the rock faces, or just the way that certain part came together? I don't know, but it's problematic. Right. Looking up over here, we see this. And I've been lucky enough to travel in parts of Great Britain, in Wiltshire, in the Orkney Islands, where there are cairns, these sites that are marked by piling up rocks. We see them in this country too, whether it's part of our native structures or predating them. Some of you may have visited America's Stonehenge, not that terribly far from here. Fascinating location that predates native traditions. And I've seen in a number of parts of the UK, this, or this. My predisposition wants me to see the same thing on Mars. And in fact, we may be seeing just that. I don't have any explanation for how that happened by accident. What is that? It's not a rover, that's definite. And shipping automobiles to Mars, I think, is very expensive. But that doesn't belong there. What is that? What is that light in the distance? NASA says it's a reflection off of something or other. For me, that really doesn't wash. It's a photograph taken by a rover, obviously some distance away. So, once again, extraterrestrial architecture. Childress was only able to work from like Xeroxes, but damn, you've got the number, you can look that up. For me, my first thought was, a terminal in an international airport. But if that's authentic, and David's been quite an ethical guy on the scene for decades, once again, game over. Once again, Richard Hoagland's work, the face, and this area around the face that he named Cydonia, with a number of really intriguing anomalies to this day that have not been explained away. This right angle and the hillside behind it photographed like some pre-biblical or that era fortifications. This is just part of the wonder of the surface of Mars. This is all natural. However, it's called, that's the name that's been given, the Inca City. And once again, we have access to lots of Google Earth photographs from Iraq, Syria, Israel, Afghanistan, Middle Eastern countries with degraded structures of civilizations, of enclaves, of cities, of encampments that look very much like this. Could it have happened to nature? Maybe. But a logical, pragmatic, even skeptical mind it's hard to say definitively. Once again, the natural structure of the surface, but it was suggested, and I thought, okay, I follow this logic, that what we're seeing here is the remains of an old quarry. And by way of presenting supporting evidence, what we're shown is, well, first, there's things going on in here that there are shapes. Is that 3 geodesics? Is this the remains of a rectangular series of structures? But they present this, and my thought was, gee, in 10,000 years, this might look like that. However, when I did my due diligence research, I saw that the entire surface of the area, running many, many miles, was this. So I discounted as the remains of some kind of quarry. Once again, we are now back in the area of, we got this okay, but what was missing here? And then once again, we start to look, you've seen cliff dwellings, Navajo, Zuni, and what is this? When we enlarge it, also here. Now this is them, researchers saying, this is what I see. I wasn't so sure until I went into enlargement. And what I want you to do is squint your eyes. there is definitive rectangular action going on here. Now, I have a hearing impairment. I don't. Oh, people like me who are specialty researchers going into this material and sharing them on different related websites. This is their opinions. Now here though, this for me is terribly exciting. And when we go into it closer, we see a recess that is of course circular. And it's hard to imagine it happens in nature because a crater doesn't leave a little island in the middle. But what's most intriguing, of course, is what seems to be the reflected surface that some of us might read, especially here, as liquid. Okay, here's a large map, no detail necessary here. We're just pointing out the areas we're going to go into. And once again, they're looking harder than most of us. What they're seeing is a bright dome proceeding, processing plant in operation, and tampering with evidence. I didn't see anything except for what seemed to be a fusing of certain areas, once again, until I went into it closer. And then I started to get intrigued. We have here, boom, 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 what looks to me like 4 convex shapes lined up in a straight line, one next to the other. This very bright area that is dome-shaped is an anomaly I don't understand. This little pinnacle, it's not as definitive as that Mars pyramid, that Les Mars pyramid, but what's that doing there? Now we get into another area of, well, what could cause this kind of natural formation, and what doesn't NASA want us to see in this area? They postulate a sprawling series of domes, open-air buildings, etc. Again, we're getting into the territory where these photos are gilt-edged. You can check them against the NASA database. We have all the information, and one can say, maybe it's some kind of pixelization that could happen under certain conditions, even with the high-quality photographic equipment that we're using there. Or, this is the remains of a damn city. I have a great deal of trouble buying this as something that happened in nature. Now, here's an example of where they really got me. Mining operations, they name these things. Here's a building here. And I didn't really see it, once again, until I went in deeper. There looks like a very rectangular structure with an extension coming off of it. It's another reading of it, another reading of it. But in any case, it looks like something on a hillside that may not be natural. This is also a perfect example of what I would call an orphan photograph. I lean toward this being actually there, or somebody did a very clever job of suggesting that it's there. So if it is there, it ain't natural. If it was faked by some zealot, good job. It's very light here, but that's a track and dead on straight. That is on the surface of Mars. It ain't left over from some rover. That's something else. L crater. Now, in these photographs, it's a bit ambiguous, but check this out. I may be predisposed to wanting this to be, but it sure looks like water to me, within a recess. We've seen this a zillion times, from in tide pools to flying over areas with recesses in water. Okay, the tubes of Mars. When we first started to photograph these, the scientific establishment postulated that obviously, because they had to be natural, there were suggested explanations for it. Other people who felt that the explanations were not sufficient came to believe, and do their best to support it with evidentiary material, that this is some kind of tubular passageway, even if it's miles and miles long. And here, once again, we have areas where these seemingly at first innocuous, small, white marks along the edges may or may not be constructed. Could this be a conduit for water, or again, a passageway, possibly even translucent or transparent, for going from one point to another without exposing yourself to the Martian atmosphere? Again, they see water. I see the possibility of water. And again, this softening along the edge here. It just, also in here, also here, here. There are problems. Once again, a close-up. And what they're reading as tall buildings, I don't know, it suggests a rectangular shape. Again, the softening of images here, but what are these white shapes on the edge of that area? And here again, how soft the imagery is. A little more definitive here. The dialogue that goes on between this area of specialty researchers is as intriguing as, theoretical physics. They're doing their best to wrap their heads around impossible imagery as far as our conditioning in, the conventional world. This one, when I first saw these, they suggested the structure of earthworms, just kind of this natural segmentation. But I'll tell you what, if I was some kind of major engineer 500 years from now doing terraforming on the surface of Mars and trying to figure out a way to create more life-hospitable conditions, I would certainly think of creating some kind of tunneling with either available material or finding a way to refine available materials and create something approaching plastics or whatever to get from one point to another. Not a big stretch. Again, these are high-resolution photos. What accounts for that kind of striations? Why that bright white shape there? What is going on here that is fused to a degree? And I think sometimes, and I'm sure some of these folks who I think overall do a terrific job, would be the first to say, yeah, I was maybe pushing the envelope a little bit there, but, and if passageways, wouldn't it make sense that they interconnect at certain points? But if anybody, this is not the remains of some volcanic activity to the best of our knowledge, and nothing in our understanding of Martian geology accounts for these kind of structurings. even closer. Can you imagine what an engineering feat this was if it was created by intelligences? And we find them in different areas of the surface. Sometimes, for me, one of the best tools that we have in assessing these images is just to squint our eyes slightly. If there's when you see a pixelated face, you know, we're hiding the image of the real person because they're in the witness protection program, and you squint your eyes, you're going, whoa, I think I could recognize this guy. Whoa is right here. What the hell? And again, these structures, if we're reading what I think we are miles high. Miles high. What did they so not want us to see here? It's almost embarrassing. But I have to stress again, all of these changes were done in-house. This is how these photos were released to the public. Nobody was doing it to embarrass NASA or JPL in the civilian realm. Bing, bing, bing. I guess it's possible, certainly within the realm of possibility, that over the millennia, you know, foreign bodies hit the surface and every once in a while, they form something that seems to make sense or geometrically appears to be the product of intelligence rather than a variation on 1,000 chimpanzees and 1,000 typewriters for 1,000 years and somebody's going to produce a script to Hamlet. I don't think so, but I like the philosophical idea. Or even a broken clock is right twice a day. This is a hole. It's not an illusion of an opening. It is an opening. This is a close-up. We see that edge and different patterning around it that some of these folks feel is organic growth. I question that, but I'm intrigued. Here's the very edge in the lower left. And we have no idea what that opening is about or what could account for it in the natural world. Okay, once again, we have something major either being fused here or we're looking at some huge translucent covering with several long rectangular shapes in there and what I would call a ridge. That, I guess, could happen in nature, but when we look closer, well, don't have it there, but can also be read as a series of organized structures along a definitive geological progression. NASA, originally, the photos that we see were made up of strips that are reassembled to capture a wider expanse. This is an edge that wasn't quite covered up. This blows my mind. That's a black rectangular edge if ever there was one. And deductive reasoning, logical thinking, suggests that somebody was trying to hide it. Again, you're a technician, you're highly cleared, there's only so many of you, you're working away, you've got assignments, and sometimes we just miss things. It's human nature. Terribly exciting as well. There's no explaining the effusion in this bottom half of the photograph, and in fact, are those craters? Or are we seeing circular depressions like an old hill fort? And if it's natural, how did those happen? But once again, the damning evidence is in those two arrows, and the third to a degree. This, for me, is terribly exciting. This is one of the places where anybody can be an investigator, a researcher, a pioneer in trying to establish a point of order in science, in the way information is being held back from us. And even though this is not my discovering somebody else's work was very exciting to me. This is on Mars. Well, I've saved this last series for the last because I wanted them to appear in the context that you've just seen. Again, the overview shots are one thing. Mars rover shots, pictures taken on the ground. Now, again, an orphan photograph alleging to be on Mars that NASA has said is authentic, but it's just a natural break in a rock formation that the human mind wants to read as, wow, gee, there's a doorway in the side of that hillside. However, this is an uncontested NASA photograph, which once again, they brush off. I don't think that that's natural. Okay, get ready for a wild ride here. What is going on here? What is going on here? What is going on under that? I'm going to go back again. Yes, that's a cross. And yes, that's a right angle. There is, I don't think, any other way to read this cross shape as anything but something above the surface going like that. While, of course, here on Earth we have a very strong association in the great Judeo-Christian tradition that a cross has a very specific symbolic value. It's a very simple structure. Could it happen in nature? I guess in certain conditions. But here, I'm hard-pressed. That said, again, we have every bit of technical information here, and yet what we think we're seeing, of course, can't possibly be on the surface of Mars because, well, it just can't be there. Is this kind of a procession way? What is the size of this anomaly? And was it somehow natural? But if it's not natural, could it be anything other than a representation of a humanoid figure, I'm imagining, in stone? Once again, a friend suggested it's obviously half of that famous photo of Sasquatch moving through the woods, and, well, but we're stuck with that. More to the point, we're stuck with this. The asteroid Phobos, the moon Phobos, has an anomaly on it. You know, it's kind of what the Death Star imagery was based on, but this is the moon Phobos. And did I have another one to back it up? Well, heavily cratered. This obelisk is on Phobos. The whole wonderful Kubrick plot point is embodied right here, except that this isn't a fantasy and did not and could not have happened in nature. As we began, this is the remains of something on the surface of our moon that we have seen one way or the other since we're children. It's the foundation of a rectangular building or structure, and we're stuck with that. This is the same thing on the surface of Mars. My intention in putting this talk together was in great part, as I said, because we're also conditioned at this point through the miracle and the double-edged sword of Photoshop technology to know that we can't ever trust another photographic or representational image in our life unless it comes to us with the pedigrees from NASA, from JPL, whatever their explanations. We all know we're not alone in the universe. Damn, some of our cousins out there have been particularly busy. Thanks for your time and attention.